Hello everyone, and welcome to Software 2's Summit 20. My name's Keegan Moodley and I'm the UK account manager over at Software 2. Today's webinar is going to be run by Mark West, who is a senior end user computing solutions engineer at Kingston University, London. Mark's webinar is made up of two parts. So part one will last around 40 minutes. And Mark will detail Kingston University's process for managing academic software. Now, part two of the webinar is a shorter, more technical session detailing how, in light of COVID-19, Kingston have moved away from a traditional deployment of Office 365 into leveraging AppsAnywhere to deliver a more on-demand service. Today's webinar is going to be recorded, so you can have access to that if you wish. Can I ask that any questions be put in the questions field on your GoToWebinar window, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of each part. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over control to Mark, and he's going to take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone, from a less than sunny UK. I think the weather here is about what you'd expect from the UK. It's been raining. So thanks very much, Keegan, and thank you for Software 2 for asking me to speak. As Keegan said already, I've got a two-part session. The first is very process orientated. It's how we manage our academic software estate and how we deal with things like our testing and packaging release process, how we identify key stakeholders and so on. The second part is a very recent decision we made on altering the way that we are upgrading to Office 365. So as Keegan said, the first part, about 40 minutes or so, will be how we manage our academic software estate. The second part, just a short 10-minute snippet on how AppsAnywhere and Cloudpaging essentially came to our rescue in light of COVID-19 and finding all our staff workstations all of a sudden remote. So about Kingston University, we're based in Kingston upon Thames in southwest London, just on the very, very edge of London and the borders with Surrey. We've got about nearly 17,000 students at the last audit, including nearly 4,000 from 140 countries across the world. It's a very, very disparate range of students we've got. We cover a vast array of different some academic disciplines, some more vocational ones. I'll particularly call out the last one on there. A lot of our nursing students ended up on the front line at St George's Hospital and so on recent events. Obviously, huge thanks go to their work. And in particular, our student profile is very, very non-traditional. Even now in 2020, we get a lot of students that are still first in family to go to university. So we're not the very high end, the sort of Oxford and Cambridge, the academic side. What we look at is really, as the big statement at the top there says, what we can do about enhancing our students' life chances. It's about taking them from whatever background they come from and making them better. And in fact, although a number of years ago now, I was a first in family to go to university. So this university, it's my university and it matters to me. So intro to me, as I said, I'm a Kingston graduate in mathematics and computing some years ago now. I worked in Faculty of Science and then latterly a merger into Science, Engineering and Computing before we then centralised IT across that university in 2015. My expertise is fairly wide-ranging: application deployment, desktop management, desktop infrastructure, and even quite a bit of work in software licensing. And it's that last one, that software licensing, that led me down to the process that I'm going to be presenting today. So onto the nitty-gritty, which is how we manage our academic software estate. This is what we call our module software requirements process. And key tenets of this is that we identify our key academic stakeholders, those that have the key interest in our teaching applications, who uses them in their teaching. We understand our software and license consumption. This allows us to identify gaps in our licensing state, and even sometimes where we can actually save money because software is no longer being used. Also, how we test and release new and updated applications. The history of this presentation actually is one that I I've been looking to do for Software 2 for probably 2 years ago, and I spoke to a number of them about this presentation. I've spoken to a lot of universities at various Software 2 user days, and the background of talking to other universities was that a lot of them I've spoken to, they don't fully understand who uses their applications. Applications are built for teaching, they're released. They don't really know who uses them, who consumes them. Lots of applications go out untested. And so I felt we've got as solid a process as I've seen anywhere. And so offered to give this presentation. So firstly, the history of the process. I would love to say to you all that we came up with some detailed plan about how we're going to implement this process, understood fully in advance how everything we were going to gain from it. The reality is that that simply isn't true. We kind of stumbled across this almost by accident. So in 2010, I've already mentioned that I came from the academic side of the organisation. We were merging the faculties of science, of engineering and computing into a single faculty. Now, that was a big challenge because that covered in excess of 70% of the software we used across the university. Now, the biggest issue for us at the time was this is going back to the days of Windows XP and just pre our Windows 7 migration. We displayed every single app in each faculty to every single user. So if you were a science student, you saw biology apps, chemistry apps, and so on. If you were an engineering student, you saw the engineering apps, likewise computing and maths. That was never going to work when we put that faculty together. We had some 10,000 students in that faculty, several hundred applications that were going to all sit in that start menu. Clearly that was unworkable. So at the same time as merging that faculty together, we were looking at the migration to Windows 7. So that really offered us an absolute green field to rethink our deployment strategy, our consumption strategy. Lastly, 2015 came around and we got our next big change in how IT was being delivered. We were moving out of faculties into a more centrally managed environment. What was good about the way that we undertook that process was that we were able to look at best practice. And this best practice from within my faculty was then adopted across the university to the process that we have today. So this is tried and tested. We've been running this for over a decade and 5 years now across the entire university. So as I'm going to go through this presentation, I think it's probably just best to establish a few bits of terminology, what our academic calendar looks like, our terminology for our teaching components and so on. So first of all, we have our teaching blocks. This is how we divide up our academic year. And we divide our main academic year into 2 teaching blocks. The first mid-September to the end of December. The second from January to mid-July. So this is in effect our main teaching year as most universities would run on. We then have an additional teaching block 3. This essentially runs our summer schools, our pre-sessional language courses. So I mentioned already, we have a lot of students come in from all different parts of the world. This is the English qualifications that they need to be able to study at a UK university. We don't tend to do a lot IT-wise for teaching block 3 because these are very small scale events. So bulk of the activity for this process really happens in teaching block 1 and teaching block 2. We then have modules. This is our specific unit of teaching covering a defined subset of an academic subject. So for an undergraduate course, each student will do 4 modules a year. And those modules will cover teaching block 1 and teaching block 2. Exams are taken at the end of that, at the end of each module. So our students will typically do 4 exams a year. And lastly, and one of the key elements that drives this process and makes it work is the module leader. Module leader, as it sounds like, this is the nominated member of academic staff responsible for teaching on this module. So what we expect of them is that they have a full overview of all the teaching of the modules, including all the resource requirements. So what I mean here is not just IT stuff, but in a chemistry lab, they understand all the equipment's required and so on. But for our perspective, this is the IT resources required. What specialist labs do they need? What specialist software do they need? So we then run a requirements gathering process twice a year for our SharePoint site. We have deadlines at the end of April for Teaching Block 1, mid-October for Teaching Block 2, and as I've said already, Teaching Block 3, it's a placeholder on the calendar for certain key pre-sessional events. So we don't run a formal process for that. Outside of those formal deadlines, we still take requests from academics all through the year for different applications, because we understand that teaching doesn't necessarily work to our deadlines. Teaching evolves, new software becomes available, new techniques become available. They want to embed in teaching as quickly as possible. We always make these best endeavours. We generally deliver pretty much all of the time on these best endeavours. It might not be for the first week of teaching, it might not be even for the 5th week of teaching, but we get there. And that best endeavour is a phrase that many academic staff have heard from me quite a lot over the years. It's part of the way, the formal wording which we engage with them in this process. So how is this process made up? So it's made up of a number of components, 3 distinct parts. The first is how we match titles from our existing software catalog to modules. So module X uses Photoshop, it uses Premiere, for example. How we take requests to upgrade existing software. So I would like to upgrade AutoCAD 2019 rather to AutoCAD 2020. And lastly, how we take requests for new software. Now, this is obviously the big one for a lot of academic staff. They want lots and lots of new software. The availability of money within departments comes into this as well, but we broker all those requests on their behalf. So looking at the first part of that process, what we ask each module leader to do is to complete a form for that specific module. So on the example here, I've got a new module that's running this year in mobile application development. This is using Visual Studio, NetBeans, PyCharm, and Xcode. All the kind of tools that you would think necessarily for writing mobile apps for iOS and for Android. So this is existing software titles only, not new or upgraded software. So we note that it includes the version number in there as well. So we provide a bunch of guidance. The key part of this process is that we say that this is for specialist software only. So we automatically assume Word, Excel, and PowerPoint are going to be available. No need to list that. No need to list things like Acrobat Reader, those kind of things. And then we've got a bunch of other guidance in there about what to do if you want new software, if you want upgrades, or any of the modules are missing from the list or whatever it might be. So first, the member of staff selects what faculty they were in. That then filters down to the list of modules that are available in that faculty. They select their module. They then can select different bits of software that are available to that module. Key part of this is to reduce the load on the academic staff. We only ask them to update this when there's a change. So it's not something they have to fill in every year. And that was a key part of getting engagement with the academic staff. They didn't feel like they wanted a process they had to do every year when nothing was changing, which for a number of subjects, that is the case. So we only ask them to fill it in when something changes. So the list of existing software, including the current version, is in a drop-down that they select from, and that is maintained by myself and my team in combination with some of our local lab technicians, particularly again in our science, engineering, computing faculty, where they have lots and lots of specialist stuff that's attached to equipment. So for example, here we've got MATLAB, we've got Maple, we've got all the MATLAB toolboxes and that listed. Our software catalog, which holds all of that software data, it knows certain things. It knows what environments we can provide that application in. So something fairly generic like Adobe Photoshop, that can run in both our Windows desktop and our Mac desktop, as you can see from that drop-down. It also knows about what specialist environments we have as well. So the example here is ANSYS, which is a fairly common engineering app across academia. We also have that in addition to our Windows desktop, it's also available in our Linux HPC cluster. So This particular module, I was just using this one as an example. It would probably never use ANSYS, but they can make it available for that module on the HPC as well. Right, so moving on to the second part of the process. This is the request to upgrade an existing bit of software. So the software title is filled in from a drop-down. Again, this is our list of existing software titles. The version number is pulled in and the supported platforms is pulled in. I note there that I really should rename Apple OS X to Mac OS to be a bit more current, but it is what it is. The member of academic staff then fills in what version they would like. So in this case, we want to upgrade Photoshop from CC 2019 to CC 2020. We then ask them to fill in why they want this particular upgrade. And the key for this is it builds a basic business case for that upgrade. So that if there ever comes a time when we are resource challenged, we can only support upgrades for certain numbers of applications in any given process, we can look at what's driving the upgrade and prioritize, and maybe in combination with the academic, maybe defer this for a year. We understand then what they want, why they want it, and so on. The information that tends to be filled in here tends to be a little lighter than we would like, but we fleshed that out by going back to them and understanding a little bit more about what the upgrade involves. Obviously, more generic stuff like Photoshop, it's easy to understand why you're upgrading something like that. But the more specialist an application gets, the more we might want to understand in a bit more detail what we're doing, why we're doing it, what the gains are, versus any other upgrade we might be doing. Requests for new software, very similar. The form is obviously a lot more free form because we have absolutely no idea what the software title is at this point. So there's additional fields on there for product details, number of licenses required, any download links there might be, as well as costs and any alternatives that might be considered. So one of the first things that we look at there is, do we have any of the alternatives available already? So might we be able to supply a bit of software for this particular bit of teaching out of our existing software catalog? It might well be that that isn't suitable, but we'll try to do the best we can, and that way we constrain our software estate a little bit. So in addition, we also ask for what modules that new software might be used on. This helps in the prioritization of budgets for the departments that are buying this. So for example, a bit of software costing 10K for one module that's got 10 students on it is going to have a lot less value than a bit of software that's costing 10K for 20 modules covering 1,000 students. So this allows us to feed into those people making the financial decisions. Okay, you've only got so much money. Our recommendation would be you spend your money in this direction as opposed to that direction. Again, it builds a basic business case for this purchase. So all of these from SharePoint generate a ticket in our service desk system. Now, just a bit of a side note there, the reason why we use SharePoint and to talk to our service desk system is the forms that we can provide in SharePoint currently are a lot more dynamic than our service desk system can currently support. That is under review at the moment. Ideally, we would like this all in one place. Hopefully by next year it will be. So those tickets come into end user computing team, and almost invariably that will be me that reviews them. So you can see this is just a snippet from my current workload. This was taken last week, of new software requests, module requirements and so on that I still need to review, or I'm in the process of working with academic staff to flesh out and get released. So if there are no issues, it moves straight into our build, test and release program. So essentially that for us is it will be allocated to a packager in my team, and we'll deliver it, build it with Cloudpaging, test it, deliver it with AppsAnywhere. Unless that application is one that doesn't lend itself to that kind of deployment, it needs to go in a very small area or something like that, where we might use another technology, but largely 99% of our applications go out with Cloudpaging and AppsAnywhere. If there are issues with the request, then my first point obviously is to go back to the request to try and flesh out what the problems will be. Examples of the kind of things we get there. We had one this year where it was a bit of Mac software for a school that was a school whose labs were all Windows based. So what we needed to flesh out there is what labs they were going to teach it in, how they anticipated this teaching working. The most common one is a request coming in for software that needs to be bought with there being no funding available to do so. That's obviously the biggest challenge, the most common one, and one that I imagine lots of universities are going through. But we understand that, and this process allows us to identify how much the total spend would be for a given department, for a given faculty, for a given year, and allows them to prioritize that spend if they need it. We then have a committee that sits in the background on this. It doesn't meet very often, but the meetings are timed around this process, where if we do need input from a wider audience, we can do so. So all of these tasks get built into a little tracker that's stored on our cloud box infrastructure. This just allows me, mainly used by me, to keep track of our overall packaging process rather than having to dive into individual service desk tickets, but it is public. All members of IT staff can see this. All members of our ASAG, Academic Software Assurance Group, can see this. So they can see where we're at in the summer and in the winter through our packaging process. And invariably what we're focusing on is those that aren't green at the moment. Why aren't they green? Let's try and address that. It may be there's a purchase, it may be there's a technical issue with the software, i.e. that software that was for Mac only and to be delivered into Windows labs and so on. So at the moment, this is where we're at as of earlier today. Most of the stuff is green. We're in a pretty good position for this summer, even with all the need for remote teaching as it's coming up. And a few things have come off that list. So there's a few things that still need addressing. At that point, we've gone through the process element of it. We've identified what we're packaging for who. And this is where we're then putting applications through our build, test, and release program. Once an application's been packaged, it might have been only requested by a couple of members of staff, but everyone then gets the upgrade. So this is where we use our module data as which modules have listed which applications. We've identified our key stakeholders here. So these will be the people that will be asked to test this software. So for example, we have, this is Photoshop. These are all the 49 modules that use Photoshop or at least have said they use Photoshop. So when we have a new version of Photoshop available, we will ask the module leaders of all 49 of those modules to test it against their teaching. How does this work? Well, it's an Access database. It's an Access database that doesn't actually store any data. It just acts as a front end for SharePoint. So as I've said, some of the technology behind this is showing its age a little bit now, and we are looking to refresh that and bring it into our service desk system. But it's been in place for 10 years, so it's done a really, really good job for us. Once we've identified our key stakeholders, all the module leaders that use a particular application, we've then got a templated email that goes out to all of those, asking them to test that bit of software, be it a new bit of software, be it an upgrade. So this is just an example of one of those emails. I copy in all the modules and document why they're receiving the email, what modules we know about. So just in case there are any that aren't listed, we can try and pick up any stragglers, and what the testing process is. So physical desktops here, virtual desktops if applicable. We then follow that up a few weeks before the start of teaching to give all those module leaders a final opportunity to test. So important note for the IT people amongst us, we absolutely do not use the phrase UAT because our academic staff simply won't understand what that means. So I do not mention the phrase UAT or anything similar anywhere in this process. So what we hope comes from that is that all of those module leaders, all 49 of them for Photoshop, go away, they test the software against their teaching, they come back to us and they give us a big thumbs up. That's the ideal outcome. We can then release that software immediately. If we don't get full sign off, we wait until just before the beginning of the teaching block, having chased once or twice, said, please go away, do your testing, come back and let us know. But If we don't get full sign-off, and that is one of the common issues, even with our process, that software is released, signed off, or not. So it's released as is. Where software has been fully signed off, it moves into a standard model change through our change management process, similar to, imagine, everyone that's on this webinar is running. So examples of things that have been released under that process in the last year, and then examples of one that haven't. So if we haven't had full sign-off, then we take this to CAB, and that allows our change board to have any input it wants into whether we should release or not. Invariably, we do release all of these, and so they get their appropriate priority. The only one that was non-minor here was when we were migrating from an Oracle JDK, because that really did have a bit of an impact on teaching. So we felt it was a bit of a higher priority. So the idea is, just going back to this here, is that all of these people will be happy and we can have a standard model change. So what does this process do for us? For us in IT, we understand our key stakeholders. Absolutely vital. We know who our key academics are. We can communicate with them. We can let them know what's going on. They understand when IT is changing something. We can identify license shortages and even overages. So perhaps we can recover some licensing. Perhaps we can not renew something, save the university a bit of money along the way. As well as we formalise our testing process. Everyone then is on the same page. We understand what we're doing. The academic staff understand what we're doing, and they understand why. More importantly, they understand why we're doing it. Benefits for the academic staff. Well, they feel ultimately they're engaged with. They're a part of this process. We're not some faceless IT department that sits in the building out the way that they never see, and all of a sudden just changing things on them. So there's no surprises when we begin a teaching block. The last thing that we want as part of this process is that member of academic staff steps into a teaching room and the software has changed on them and they didn't know about it. This process means, as long as they've registered themselves as a stakeholder via their module leadership, they shouldn't be surprised. And ultimately, what this leads down to is the really, really key benefit of this is that by staff knowing what they're doing, by staff not being surprised about software changes and things like that, we improve our overall teaching and ultimately student satisfaction. And ultimately, that is why we're all here. The system isn't perfect. It's as good as we can make it, but it really isn't perfect. The process itself, I think, is pretty solid. It's reliable. It's tight. It's tried and tested. But still, as you've seen from an earlier slide, a number of the applications still go out fully tested and released as is. Across different subject areas, we have less than 100% engagement. So the faculty that's been using it the longest, our science, engineering, and computing, are pretty much fully engaged with this. Some of our other departments a bit less so. But that's changing with time. We're improving this year on year. But the important thing is, we then understand where our gaps in this process are. Without this process, everything is an unknown. But what we then know is we know where our gaps are. Those unknown unknowns become known unknowns, as the saying goes. So absolutely important. So that way, if we know we've never had engagement with a particular module, we understand that. We know why. And I can't help but mentioning COVID-19 at this point. Like everyone else across the world, we're looking at significant changes in the way that we teach. Even where some students will be on site for things like chemistry practicals and unavoidable practicals like that, the vast majority of our students next year are going to be distant. So we need to understand how we deliver all that teaching in a remote way. And this process, understanding who our key stakeholders are, what modules use what software, how much software is used by who and by different departments, we've been in a really, really good position to understand what we need to do for September. And what's come out of it as a noticeable benefit of this is that those areas with lower engagement in this process really have been behind the curve. And they as departments have got a lot more work to do to understand what's required for remote teaching. We obviously need to help them along with this. And one of the ways in which we're doing that is, let's get this process documented. Let's understand what your requirements are, because that helps us not just with COVID-19, but it helps us every year from this point onwards. So at that point, that's everything on this topic, and I've finished in roughly about the time I thought I would. So I think we've got a few minutes for some questions.
Fantastic, Mark. That was extremely interesting, and it's a great demonstration of quite a robust process you have over there at Kingston. Yeah, there's a few questions that's come in. One just regarding how you guys handle the retiring of software titles, and I mean, do they stay forever, or what's the process there?
So what we like to do, and if I can jump back to an earlier slide and maybe try and highlight it, is what might not be obvious from this form. No, in fact, it definitely isn't obvious from this. There is the ability to remove an application from a module. There's the ability for an academic, there's actually just off this screenshot is a little button that allows them to remove a row. So ideally what we want and what academic staff do is if they're no longer using an application, they remove it from that module. I then know it's no longer used on that module. If it's the last module it's used on, I will then be able to search my Access database for oh, gone too far, for a software title. I will see there are no modules using that. I can then put that through a retirement process. And it might be simple as just remove it from AppsAnywhere Cloudpaging if it's a bit of freeware. If it's a licensed application that we're paying for, we will then have to go through the decommissioning of that license. We will have to give notice on a contract and so on. And ultimately, we can save some money that way. So that's how we do that. I will say though that, as I'm sure is the case with other universities, academic staff are very, very, very quick to tell us about all the new stuff they want. They're less quick to tell us about the stuff that they're no longer using. So yes, it's still a challenge even for us, but we have a mechanism in our process by which we can remove an application. Hopefully that answers that question. I think it does.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I just mentioned the process is extremely robust. I guess one question that's come in here as well: how many IT staff are involved in managing this process as well as packaging as your primary job? So how many people are in your team, and who manages this process?
Right. So we have across our EUC team, we have, let's see, I'm just going to have to count these on my fingers here. We have 8, including a degree level modern apprentice. However, the involvement with this process is largely, it's owned and run by me as a single person doing all of the process work. So all the handling, if I can just go back to that screenshot there, all of those tickets come in and they get assigned to me in the first instance. I don't do necessarily much of the packaging, but I do all the process management of it. We've then got one person, Chris Smith, who's on this webinar. Many of you in the UK have met Chris at various Software 2 user days. He does an awful lot of our packaging, one of the most experienced packagers with Cloudpaging in the world. Worked for Numescent for a time as well. He does a lot of the packaging, as does our degree level apprentice Lucas. But the process, therefore the process is largely handled by the 3 of us in its entirety. If it's a Mac app, we have Alan on our team who's a Mac specialist.
Fantastic. And then just another one, Mark. So the business owners, they state what platform they want the software to be working on, i.e. whether they'd be working on Chromebooks or Macs, or is that for you guys to make that judgment?
So in that terms, for existing software, we already understand what application the platform runs on. So in this case, Photoshop, we can support it on Windows and Macs. They tell us largely what platform it is. Now, if it's a new application, let's say, for example, we get a new application request, and it's something that's only used on Chromebooks. Well, we don't have any Chromebooks as an organisation, so that's where we will involve our academic software assurance group. There's this clearly goes beyond just a software purchase. We've got to purchase a ton of hardware at that point. What we will do is we will work to understand what that teaching requirement is. Is there another way it can be delivered? Is there another application? If there truly isn't, and it has to be Chromebooks and we have to deliver it, that will then go over to the individual department themselves. Ultimately, someone's going to have to fund that decision. But we will guide, we will assist, we will lead. Sometimes we will steer, but ultimately we will guide. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. Yeah, that was a great insight, Mark, into how you guys actually handle software over at Kingston. And I think a lot of people will find it very, very helpful indeed. So it looks like we're gonna just have enough time to move on to the second part of your webinar. If you'd just like to take it away when you're ready.
Yep, indeed. So thank you everyone for listening to that. I genuinely hope you found it useful. As I say, certainly from my conversation with the other universities, it's something that Kingston has a pretty solid handle on, and I hope others can gain a bit of benefit from what we were doing. The second part of this was a much more recent, much more tactical decision, where AppsAnywhere and Cloudpaging have essentially come to our rescue. We, like everyone else, were faced with a situation where all of a sudden, almost overnight, certainly within the space of a week or two, all of our staff clients were all of a sudden remote, same as everyone else across the world. Pre-COVID-19, we had a project going, we had a plan in place that we were going to upgrade to Office 365 and Teams. This summer, we'd got all the process in place, we got all the project governance done, we'd done everything we needed to do. And to borrow a phrase from some of our American colleagues for baseball, we were thrown a bit of a curveball. COVID-19 came up, all of a sudden the world was a different place, our user base was in a different place, so we needed to adapt. So the original plan was to use our traditional management tools. Student machines would be upgraded as part of a re-imaging process that we do every year. Staff machines, we would push the upgrade when someone logged in, run a silent upgrader, Office 365 upgrade to give them Word 365, Teams, OneDrive, all of those good technologies and so on. Because it was running in a system, we would wrap that in a custom upgrade tool that we'd written. So all the plans in place, all of a sudden the world is a different place. So just to cover what a custom upgrader tool does, I've already mentioned that the Office 365 is great. If you're installing this yourself, it makes sure you close all the applications, it makes sure you've got enough disk space and so on. But when your staff aren't admin, all of a sudden you've got to run this system. All this lovely stuff that Microsoft had built for us has now gone. So we needed to reproduce that ourselves. So we built our own custom installer branded with our Powered by IT logo that you can see there. This replicates a lot of what the Office 365 installer does already. So it checks for Office apps running, it checks for free disk space. It even allows the member of staff to defer it. So we're pushing the upgrade in a traditional world, but we allow you to say, not now, IT. I'm in the middle of something. I'll come back to it later. And we allow deferral up to 25 times. And it also had a link to our documentation in there. Here's why you're getting Office 365. Here's what it means. Here's all the good stuff. So absolute credit goes to Adam Wilden, who's a fantastic .NET developer and writes all these utilities for us. He generally is really, really good at this. Post COVID-19, all of a sudden, world's changed, our environment's changed. So we had to reassess what we're doing. And the first big part of reassessment was to split that Office 365 project into two. First of all, let's focus on Teams. Teams was an important part of what we were going to have to do in a remote working world. So we put together an accelerated Teams project. Teams was just installed by individuals on their own machines because there was no admin rights required. So that removed that from our Office 365 upgrade project. So that's that done. This is Teams as I see it. So that project is now winding up from a deployment perspective, but we have streams running to support remote teaching, to support remote committees and all these different things, good stuff that you might do with Teams. But we're now back to Office 365. Yes, we've rolled out Teams, but we've still got the rest of Office 365 and OneDrive and all this extra stuff still to do, because we still need to achieve that. We still need to get there. Office 2016 is end of life. We have to move away from this. So we've got to do something this summer. So rest of the Office 365 suite is now back on the table. It needs to be deployed, but our staff aren't here. We can't use our traditional management tools. They're not as reliable when working off-site. The whole idea of pushing something onto people, they don't have traditional login times as much anymore. People are working slightly more ad hoc hours. So we sat and had to think about this and said, look, our existing technologies aren't working. Our existing techniques aren't as viable as they were. Let's have a rethink. So what we opted to do is move to a more light touch. Rather than us go to them, we'll let them come to us. And so this is AppsAnywhere and Cloudpaging to our rescue. So what we did is we built a Cloudpaging app that contained all of the Office 365 installation stuff, our start menu modifications, and a few other bits, as you'll see in a minute. And we deliver that through AppsAnywhere. And Cloudpaging handles the elevation for us. So absolute credit to this app tech goes to Chris Smith, who's on this webinar. He did all the work on this and he's done a fantastic job. And this is working really, really well. We're soon going to be really pushing this to staff. We've had a few people in IT testing this, and largely this has all gone well. So what does the app set contain? A number of custom app events. So the first one, after registration, it creates a dynamic script based on the application ID in Cloudpaging that allows us to unregister itself and remove it from the Cloudpaging player once it's done its work. The after launch runs our custom upgrader, same thing as we were planning on using on-premise with some minor modifications that we'll see in a minute. And then an after exit script that removes itself from the Cloudpaging player, so cleans up after we're done. So after the upgrade to Office 365 is done, we remove any trace of our Office 365 upgrader. We've then got just one registry value, which is our start menu layout. So this is what gives us our Word 365 on our pin tiles. We also put Edge Chromium as our default browser for the next year as well. So we've also made that move this year as well. And then the app set also contains our supporting files. So our custom upgrader, our start menu, XML layout there, KU layout of 04.xml, as well as the standard Office 365 setup program and an Office configuration file, which takes all the files from Microsoft CDN, which means we're not pulling stuff from on-premises. We're fully using Microsoft CDN to deploy Office 365. Our modified upgrader, just going back to that earlier slide. So this upgrader was modified just to remove essentially one thing that we didn't need. Because we were pulling this from asking people to go to AppsAnywhere, launch the app themselves, we removed the deferral option because there was no need to have that in there. It would confuse matters more than it helped. So that's what that does. Office 365 deployed via Cloudpaging, elevated using Cloudpaging's elevation capabilities, all scripted, all cleaned up through Cloudpaging and delivered through AppsAnywhere. So that's that last bit, very tactical solution. Hopefully that all made sense, but if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to answer those now.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, there's a few questions that have come in.
I'm struggling to see the questions. It's shrunk on me, so you'd have to read them to me, Keegan.
So what Office 365 update schedule have you guys chosen? I.e., was it monthly or biannually?
Yeah, so that actually, the answer is there in the picture. I'm not sure whether you can actually see my cursor remotely, but there's the word monthly in the XML file. So Office 365 Pro Plus from CDN monthly. So yes, we're going for the monthly channel. Part of the reason for that was looking at the Macs and keeping parity with the Macs. Macs do not have the same upgrade channel unless you go for Office 2019, which obviously isn't Office 365. The only available channel on Macs is monthly anyway. So for consistency with our Mac OS users, functionality-wise, we went for monthly on Windows as well.
Fantastic. And are you guys pushing out any MS projects or Visio clients as well, or?
Now that one I would actually have to ask, because Chris did all the work on this. I'm 99% sure at this point that this is Office 365 only, and therefore not projects in Visio. That is actually a very good point. That is something we do have to consider. So I would have to ask Chris on that one. But
Brilliant.
I'm pretty confident at the moment that this is. No, tell a lie. I remember this. I remember the XML file I built. So actually, I don't need to ask Chris. I can answer this one. It does include Project in Visio 2019. I remember the installer. I built it. I should know.
Fantastic. And what Office 365 model have you guys got? Is it shared device or is it user based?
Right. So this process is for our staff users. So this is user based. What we then intend on doing, so what I didn't mention in this slide set, going back to the more traditional deployment, is we will still use our traditional deployment for our on-premises student devices. They're going to be re-imaged with Windows 10, 1909, Office 365 shared devices. That's for our student devices. Where we will use the device-based licensing is on our lecterns, so our podium machines where academics step up and present, because like every university, we have lots of visiting lecturers, we have guests come in from outside. They will not necessarily have an Office 365 license. They certainly won't in our tenancy. So at that point, we will use the device-based licensing for those machines and those machines only. And what we use is we use Ivanti automation when we build machines. And I have a selector based on the machine name, the machine type, that installs Office with the right licensing scheme. Hopefully that answers that one.
Yep, definitely. And again, another one coming in here. I think I know the answer to this, but just for the rest of the audience, is there a reason why you haven't cloud paged Office 365 traditionally?
Better part of valor, I think, is an answer to that. Mm-hmm. Like most universities, we still include a number of things in our base build, and our logic here is either if it's in use by everyone on every machine, there is limited point in cloud paging it. But particularly with Office 365, it's changing on a monthly basis because that's the way we've chosen. Realistically, could we package Office 365 on a monthly basis with all the Microsoft updates, all the complexities of the licensing scheme? Realistically, no. So it's a better part of valor decision, if that makes sense there.
Yep, definitely.
And I'm not sure, and Chris definitely would be able to confirm this, and Software 2 guys would as well. I'm not sure that Office 365 is something that's particularly easy to package with cloud paging because of the complexities of the licensing scheme. I know we've certainly not tried it, and we're not going to be trying it anytime soon.
Yep. Yep. Another question we've got here as well is after pushing out Office 365 to staff off-site, do you still use any GPOs or for any settings, or is it just out of the box?
We try and keep things as out of the box as possible, and that applies not just to Office 365 but to everything we do. The logic behind that decision is that we know, yes, we can change all sorts of things on our own individual machines, but the more we deviate from an out of the box experience, the harder it is for someone coming into our organization from somewhere else to adapt, and the harder it is for someone that mixes between their own devices, our devices, and backwards and forwards to understand why things have been changed, why things are different on our machines. So as a general overriding principle in absolutely everything we do, we only change a setting if we truly, truly, truly have to. So in terms of, but just to actually answer the specific question, we don't particularly use GPOs a lot anyway. We're not a traditional Microsoft house. We use a lot of Ivanti products. We use a lot formerly Res products, obviously AppsAnywhere Cloudpaging rather than any Microsoft deployment tools. So yes, we do set some registry values. Not too many. They are limited to largely turning off auto updates and things like that. Not so much for Office 365. It's as out the box as we can make it. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. I think one last question's come in here as well. Do you redirect any documents to OneDrive?
Not at the moment. So OneDrive is being put on as part of our Office 365 process for a future step. So currently we use Box. We're in contract with Box for I think another year to 18 months. But OneDrive clearly is our direction of travel. We're getting OneDrive out there ahead of time simply because it's also used for team storage and a few other things as well. So we're not actively, aggressively pushing OneDrive at the moment, but we will be at some point in the future. Currently, we use Box Drive and Box Sync for our cloud storage for laptops. For on-premise